I now want to bring in NBC's chief foreign affairs correspondent, Andrea Mitchell. She is on the phone for us. Andrea, good morning to you. What are you learning about these horrific attacks and what Kelly was just talking about, this relationship between the U.S. and Israel?
Indeed, and I was talking to people at the Israeli embassy here in Washington who told me that they are hostages inside Gaza, civilian as well as military. The Israeli Defense Force has just confirmed that. We don't know how many, but Israel's position has always been no man or woman left behind. They traded 1,000 Palestinians for one Israeli soldier who had been captured and held for years in Gaza. So there's no price too high to pay. They will respond to try to control the situation, which is unprecedented. We've seen nothing like this, land, sea, and air invasion as they are describing it, but crossing that border from Gaza into Israel has never happened. This is the first time since the Yom Kippur War 50 years ago, almost exactly 50 years ago, that we've seen Israel under such threat. So immediately their challenge is to try to control and contain the current situation. There will be overwhelming reprisals, and we don't know where it will stop, because this administration, this coalition, is the most self-defined right-wing coalition that has ever existed in Israel, and Netanyahu has been the most hardline prime minister in, certainly in recent decades in Israel. So to that extent, this is not going to be the last of it by any means. But the short term is to control the military situation. They are keeping a very close eye on the north, where Iran-backed Hezbollah has a lot of control and, hundreds of rockets. So far, no action there. Most immediately, the West Bank will certainly have a great deal of sympathy. They've been under huge pressure from Israel. The expansion of settlements, no negotiations from both sides, very weak leadership by the Palestinians in the West Bank, and that is, of course, contiguous to Israel proper. It is completely interwoven and assimilated with Israeli society and Israeli economics, despite the barriers, the walls, and the other defenses. So that is another immediate concern. Obviously, tensions have been very high. As Kelly was saying, tensions with the U.S. But when something like this breaks out, it is, as the president says, a rock-solid commitment to Israel. There is absolutely no question that the military and intelligence support will be there. It's still to be determined how Israel had such an incredible intelligence failure, as well as the U.S. There was no warning. They've acknowledged that. No one here anticipated this happening. As to the meeting that took place in the UN, which I was covering, that was patching over problems that had existed. Netanyahu had wanted a meeting in the Oval Office in the White House for months and months and had been denied because of his policy towards the Palestinians, his expansion of the settlements, and because of the domestic situation where he was pursuing judicial changes to the Supreme Court that were very much opposed by President Biden in written statements and privately to Netanyahu. So that was only a UN meeting, which, as you know, Kristen, from all of your years of White House coverage, was not the status of a White House meeting that Netanyahu wanted. But they patched it over. He was promised a White House meeting this month, in fact, as they pursue a larger peace, which they thought might even be possible with the Saudis, which would be Middle East peace as we have not known it since 1948. But that is now beyond any comprehension when there is an all-out war in Gaza.
And as we think about the timing of this, Andrea, just very quickly before I go back to Rav Sanchez in Israel, can you talk about how those discussions about a potential negotiation between Saudi Arabia and Israel, an attempt to normalize relations there and further isolate Iran, may have been one of the factors, and I underscore that word may have because it's still very early, but it's one of certainly a piece of the backdrop to these horrific attacks, Andrea?
It's a very interesting question, exactly, Kristen, because it was moving. And just 3 or 4 days ago, in the Senate, a large group of senators put out a statement saying they supported it in principle, but did not support some of the elements without security guarantees, for instance, on a nuclear civilian plant that Saudi Arabia was demanding as one of the prices from the U.S. So there were a number of conditions. I talked to people very high in the government, in our government, just a few days ago, and they said it's really going to be a stretch to get this through the right-wing coalition in Israel and through our Senate. But it's something that Netanyahu, you know as well as I, wanted very much. So did Mohammed bin Salman, the leader of Saudi, the de facto leader of Saudi Arabia, and so did the White House. Jake Sullivan was in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia for 2 successive weekends last month and has been, openly engaging in this. It's something that President Biden clearly thought might be possible, but what he told Netanyahu in that meeting at the UN was not without guarantees for the Palestinians. So that was his demand, as well as the Saudis at least. And so that would be another very hard piece for the Israeli right-wing coalition to swallow.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.